Hello my friends, it's Carpo here. Today I would like to talk a little bit about the economy. And before you turn off the video, give me a chance to explain here. There is nothing less sexy and more boring than talking about economics. Believe me, I know. I remember reading a book years ago. It was called The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's about this thick, like 900 pages. I think I got it from my mom, who was taking a tax class and they were having her read it. Talked about the Federal Reserve, fiat money, how the whole system is completely eroded, and it's enough to make a person lose hope. Just reading something like that. Not lose hope that we can ever improve our society, but lose hope in the idea that any of the experts really understand fully what's going on. We've tried several different ways of operating our society. We've tried to argue between socialism or communism, capitalism. We've seen the ups and downs of all the different methods of, operating, and we're still learning as we go, but there are very few basic principles. You either let the system operate as it does, or you control the system with the government. There's really no other option. So, whether you believe in free market or not, hopefully you'll join me on a few pointers here on one particular subject that I think a lot of Americans are unaware of and should be more aware of, and that's stock buybacks. It's something that you hear, but people don't realize how much it's impacting them. And I guarantee a lot of you are being directly impacted by this from the companies you work for, which I will specify later on. There's a second book. I asked my wife, I told her I wanted to get this. She got it for me, I think, a year ago for Christmas. It's called Capital by Thomas Piketty. And he's from Europe. I don't recall if he's German or whatnot, but he is considered one of the top economists in the world, and he explains how the whole system is rigged. And I haven't finished. I've only gotten partially done with this one. But in the future, I will cover more of these topics only if people are interested, because really it's just, it's the bottom of the barrel on YouTube. Nobody wants to hear about facts and figures. It just is never promoted, and it's unfortunate because you do have an impact on your own life by knowing this information. So, without wasting any more time, what am I talking about with stock buybacks? Back in the 1960s, the average CEO ratio to the worker was 15 to 1. That means the CEO, on average, made 15 times more than the average worker. That has gone from 15 to 1 to 220 to 1 today, and that's just the average. The disparity between wage has been observed by all of us through multiple generations. In that same time, many corporations and companies have prospered. They've made trillions upon trillions of dollars. And for a while, wages were raising after World War II. Something happened. In the last 40, 50 years, wages have not risen at all, except for in states that have implemented higher minimum wages. But federal minimum wage has stagnated. It has not kept up with inflation. People were like, it used to be 5, now it's 7, or now it's 8. But that doesn't keep up with inflation. A loaf of bread costs 2 to 3 times more than it did when even I was a kid. So here we are, trying to afford to live in this country, while we talk about how we're just prospering so greatly and we have all these wonderful trade deals and everything's doing fine for the people. But what about the average person? That's the big question. So how do the stock buybacks actually affect you? And what is it? A stock buyback is when a company decides they are going to buy back their own stocks, especially when they're cheap. And they do this instead of giving more money to the company through employee wages. I don't know why that would turn on. The TV just turned on right in the middle of my my video, but I will not be moved. Instead of putting money into employee wages, they go ahead and put their money back into buying their own stocks in their company. This is to impress the shareholders because the shareholders run the company. And this is the interesting thing. A large corporation, it's investors over employees. But in a smaller business, or an entrepreneur, maybe a small group of people operating together, the employees are the investment, okay? And we all know that you're just disposable. You work for Walmart, you're just disposable. They'll just get somebody else. They don't really care about your feelings. But if you work for an employer, a small-time employer, often they do. And this is why I'm so adamant about supporting the idea of removing these protections for these large corporations. Like Citizens United, as a company becomes able to vote as a citizen now, I mean, why do you think that they're pushing these laws? So let's get some facts and figures here. How much money has been spent on these stock buybacks? What, a few percent, some of the income? No, a majority of the income. And some companies have gone into debt buying their own stock, while their employees can barely make a living. So they have spent equivalent to, and this is the money spent on stock buybacks. It's assumed to be equivalent to 4% of the total economic output. And you just think about that. This is in the multi-trillions of dollars. That is a huge amount of money. So the retail, if you want to get down to the actual figure, it was $7 trillion in 10 years has been spent by companies buying their own stocks. And I know that once we get into the big numbers, it's very difficult to gauge. But to give you an example on different industries, the retail industry has spent 80% of their profits last year on buying back their own stock. This is 80% of profits. And I should back up for a minute. The reason why this is happening now is because last year, of course, there was a tax break for corporations, and they're spending 40 to 60% estimated of that money, the extra money they have, instead of on their businesses to help employees, they're spending that on stock buybacks. But this all started back in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan administration actually removed this clause that protected people from that. People weren't allowed to buy back their own stocks, but companies fought because they wanted to be able to do it. And afterwards, it just was a heyday for these companies, and they started growing and growing and growing. And recently, new laws that have been passed have allowed them to further buy back more stocks, and new tax breaks allow them to have more funds to do so. And these are the companies that you work for. So if you think the retail industry was strange at 80%, it turns out that the restaurant industry, and this is what I read, I have to double check this, they spent 140% of their profits in 2017 and 18. 140% of their profits on buying back their own stock. That means that they actually had to borrow money beyond the profit that they already spent on their stocks. There's something going on with the economy there that might make us want to stop and think for a minute here. But to give you a few specific companies that I checked, Lowe's, CVS, Pharmacy, Home Depot, they all could have given each worker, apparently, these companies could have given each one of their workers an $18,000 raise with the amount that they spent buying back their own stocks. So if you work for a home improvement store, or if you work at one of these small pharmacies, just realize you could have gotten a raise of 18 grand with the amount that they just spent on their own stocks. That's really something to consider. So for a few more, Starbucks could have given each employee a $7,000 raise. McDonald's could have given each employee a $4,000 raise. And that's a lot of money if you work at McDonald's and if you don't have very much money to spare. That's every worker. That's every one of employees, the 2 million employees for McDonald's. Makes you think. We're always told that we have a trickle-down economy. And I don't even want to make a disgusting metaphoric comparison to that, but I've always laughed at that idea. We've been told consistently that all we have to do is make good deals for our companies. We have to allow them to operate how they want. We have to remove restrictions. We have to allow them to get bigger and bigger. And it's one thing for a company to get big in a capitalist society. That's fine. But they're also pushing out smaller businesses. Companies like Amazon, which if somebody has an innovation, there are plenty of stories like this. They innovate and create something that's one of a kind. They put it on Amazon. Within a month, Amazon has their own version of it, and they're selling theirs on somebody else's page. And companies are just being forced out by these large corporations. And these are the smaller companies that care about their employees still. Big corporations, they don't give a shit about you. You're a number. And I think that that's a travesty. It's these small laws that are slowly eroding our liberty that we're unaware of. And they're done under the guise of protecting, the economy. But I just want people to stop and think, if you really have repeated that before, if you really think that trade deals and all these corporate interests are helping the economy, we have to look at the facts and figures and say, why haven't our lives improved? Why haven't wages improved for the average person in that time? You can still go out and make a lot of money, but there are still plenty of people who can barely get by, and they're working their asses off to do so. And maybe that's why, I'm still on the fence about the idea of a huge federal minimum wage, because I know that would put some small businesses out, but I also know that there could be, anything over 50 employees or 100 employees. Large corporations should have to pay a minimum wage. If your company has over 1,000 employees, you should definitely have to pay a higher minimum wage if you can afford it. But there's too much money being spent buying back your own stuff. And more profits are being made and put in the pockets of the CEOs, and the disparities get bigger and bigger. And the thing is, the people create value. And we forget this. We talk about how companies create value and valuable products. It's the people that do it. The corporations are not the working class. We're the people. And some of the things that they do are not always illegal. They're just immoral. So that's all I have to say on that. I guess if you work for one of those companies, or if you work for any company, just Google how much your company buys on their own stock. I mean, many of these things, there are people who work their butts off for freedom of information to go and, find all these details so we can read them, but most people aren't interested. They figure that they can't do anything. We figure with books this big, what the hell are we going to do to improve the economy or change it? But there are small incremental changes that can really improve the structure of how we function. Small laws that can be passed if we're not fooled, if we don't have the wool pulled over our eyes and we don't believe the propaganda. We have to demand the rights for individuals. We can't get fair wages, we can't get a fair economy, we can't get decent health care. I mean, we're really falling by the wayside and we deserve better. So, demand better. Thanks for listening.